Welcome to That's So Savvy, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories and journeys of remarkable business leaders. Join our host, Nancy Aichholz, a seasoned professional and experienced entrepreneur, on her mission to discover the recipe for business success.
Welcome back, Savvy listeners, to That's So Savvy podcast. This is the last episode of our second season. Next, you can expect kind of a recap from me on what all of my second season guests are up to these days. So stay tuned for that next time. But today I have a really good friend, Christy Johnson. We got to know each other in the Cincinnati market. We were both passionately involved in the startup community in Cincinnati. And she was with an accelerator called the Ocean Accelerator. And I was at Aviatra, and we served a different clientele, but had a lot of the same mission in mind, and really supported each other during that. And then very quickly after we got to know each other, Christy took over started a fund called Fireroad. That's So Savvy podcast is supported by wonderful listeners like you. If you would like to hear more of our podcast and be more involved, please go to patreon.com, patreon.com, and you can donate as little as $5 a month or as much as you'd like to support That So Savvy podcast. If you'd like to advertise and reach our rapidly growing audience, please email us at thatssosavvypod, P-O-D, @gmail.com. That's so savvypod @gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. And we look forward to bringing That So Savvy podcast to you for a very long time in the future. So Christy, welcome. So first, before we talk about Fireroad, who's Christy Johnson? Tell me about you.
Thanks for thinking of me. The way I kind of describe myself in a quick bio is if you think of like a TV show, season 1 for me was nonprofit management. When my husband and I moved to Cincinnati in 2011, it took me a while to kind of land. And over the course of about a decade, ended up doing some really cool stuff with local nonprofits. And what's really great about working in a nonprofit is something that I also think is great about working in a startup. But you get exposure and opportunity, you get agency and room to take new things on and explore and experience a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily get as a junior employee at a very established business.
Right.
So
in a nonprofit, you need to get your hands dirty in every area.
Totally. And there's always more to do. And if you're willing to take something on, there's always opportunity to grow.
Exactly.
So over the course of 10 years, ended up where I had kind of seen every side of a nonprofit, from volunteer management to staff training and onboarding to managing risk, fundraising, IT, marketing, major donor marketing, events. Like you just really see it all. Kind of the last place I ended up working, I was getting exposed to some startups because I was working in the IT and marketing teams where we were doing some digital product development. And a lot of our vendors were technology startups. I like how they think. I like how they move and design. That really introduced me to this whole world of startups. From that kind of more traditional nonprofit organization work, I was introduced to the work of Ocean, which is a nonprofit, but works specifically with entrepreneurs.
We were nonprofits, but we were creating for-profit businesses, which makes fundraising a little bit hard.
It is a very hard cause concept. And so in that context, got to train both Main Street entrepreneurs through a 9-week program the organization had and high-tech entrepreneurs, which was really special and a very inspiring and challenging season of life for the entrepreneurs in those companies. That's how I kind of got to be where I am at Fireroad. Through my time at Ocean, I met my partner, Tim, who was a board member there, and then our other 2 partners at Fireroad around kind of the Cincinnati startup community.
Sure.
And in 2023, left Ocean to launch Fireroad with Tim and Rye and Brad.
It's only been 2 years.
2 years, wow. I know. It's like a decade in startup world.
I know, really. And you all have done amazing work in just 2 years. That's crazy.
It has flown.
Yeah, that's terrific. I love that background about you. I also love that you dove right in when you got to Cincinnati and got engaged in the community, because it isn't an easy city necessarily to move into and make a splash, because we have so many people who have been here forever, longtime families and all those kind of things. But I think in the areas where you were engaged, you made a name for yourself, met a lot of people. Your network is now huge. And now you're one of us. You're not an outsider. So let's talk about Fireroad. But before we get into really the specifics of Fireroad, because there's so much great history just in less than 2 years, let's tell our listeners a little bit about what a fund is and what's happening in the world of funds that are not necessarily like iBanking funds and things like that, but we all sort of play in that same sandbox together.
I'll start at the top with kind of the broad Fireroad work. And Fireroad exists in the financial industry, which is a little bit cringy for our team because we're operators and builders. And it's like, oh, we're in finance. We're focused on private companies. So the private market versus the public market where anyone can go and buy a stock. We have a few different strategies that are all focused around job creation, job stability and mobility, and legacy preservation around small business, especially the types of businesses that are creating and sustaining jobs that will endure as AI becomes more and more prevalent in our day-to-day lives and in commerce. We have a couple of different strategies to try to work around that mission. I manage our ventures practice, which is a very small subset, very kind of niche practice within finance. And I'll get more into the weeds of what that is. And on the very opposite end of the business and capital spectrum, we have a holdings business that acquires ownership of a small business, which is usually an LLC, and permanently holds those shares.
How are you defining a small business revenue-wise?
We would typically talk about under $50 million in revenue and less than 1,000 employees. So that's very, very broad. I would say our work right now is focused on an even smaller size business. But when we think SMB, that's kind of what we think. Now, so there's a world of that where you would have maybe a local plumbing business that employs 75 people, has a couple dozen teams, and does residential and commercial plumbing. That's the type of business that might interact with Fireroad Holdings. The venture side, I deal with high scale, high risk opportunities, mostly in technology. And I make investments that are usually only 2 to 3% ownership of a company, whereas on a holdings deal, you might acquire more than 50% of a company. Okay. So my ownership in an investment is much smaller. And what we're trying to get to with those investments is a 20x growth or 40x or 100x, not like a consistent 8% year over year growth.
Which would be what the holdings company is looking for.
Which would be like a healthy growth rate for a service business.
Right.
Those are kind of the two ends of the spectrum that Fireroad operates in. The way we come together is to try to solve problems for small business operators. So I might try to invest in a company that supports the back office or a specific service sector, or a workforce management tool that's focused on an industry with a lot of hourly workers. Things like that.
And so are you using then the solutions that your venture holdings are coming up with? You would use those solutions to support these?
That's the idea. And that's a really big part of how we decide what to invest in, is if we have small business owner and operators who can help us validate the problem that the founder is trying to solve and ideally the solution.
Right. Yeah. So on the venture side, when you are 2 or 3%, how many other investors are typically in the mix? And are you one of the larger, one of the smaller?
Within venture capital, which is how the industry I spend most of my time in, that's what it's known as, there's a huge range. There are funds that are investing $5, $10, $20 million at a time. That's not my fund.
Yet.
We invest $100,000 to $200,000 at a time. And we're investing into companies that are usually very, very early. They might have 2 or 3 full-time employees, up to 5 or 10, but they're very early. And the amount they would raise at a time would typically help them operate the business for 18 to 24 months. So usually that's between $1 million and $2 million. So our $100,000 to $200,000 check is about 10% of what they're raising at the time. So we're usually investing alongside individuals who are called angel investors or other regional investors like Centrifuge or Keyhorse. Does a lot of investing out of Kentucky. We have a lot of friends in Indianapolis, and co-investors are a big part of how we think about our deals.
And one, kind of novice question, when someone is raising funds and you are considering them, are you in contact with these other funds and other investors, or is it just kind of luck of the draw who you end up being co-investors with?
My experience has been very collaborative. I think in different environments, especially different regions, it's much more competitive and cutthroat.
Right.
But if, for example, in Cincinnati, if there's a founder within my thesis that I'm thinking about investing in, I'll say, well, have you talked with Centrifuge?
Okay.
Let's make sure that they're aware of what you're working on and the opportunity, and vice versa with them. Or if we see that sometimes there's an angel that's already invested in a company and we know most of the angels in town, we'll give them a call or just shoot an email and say like, hey, we're getting to know so-and-so. Would love to hear your experience and perspective after having worked with them. It's very collaborative. And it also comes into play as those companies mature. So once we invest, we assume those companies will raise venture capital at least 2, if not 3 more times. We need to have a network of later stage investors also. And when I know a portfolio company is getting ready to raise again, we'll develop with them a really strategic list of follow-on investors that we know their thesis well. We're very comfortable sharing our diligence and our experience around the company with those investors, supportive and active with them in that later fundraising.
Because that's going to help you see your...
Without a doubt. Yeah. Incentives are aligned there.
Vested interest for sure. Yeah. So for our listeners, I know I hear this question a lot. What's the difference between a venture capitalist venture fund and a private equity? Equity more of the holdings, the acquisition?
Well, yes and no. Most private equity exists to buy, usually fully control stake of an established business. Oftentimes they are buying multiple businesses within the same category, smushing them together, or creating shared services so that they can maximize the efficiency, reduce like the cost of goods and cost of service. And ultimately, private equity needs to sell that asset to make their returns. That's how they make money. Usually, they're working with much more established businesses, and they would have a shorter, it's called a horizon, on their investment. So they need to liquidate those holdings, usually in like maybe a 3-year window. And they might be looking for maybe a 2x on what they invest.
Because they've invested. I don't know. That's a good top line.
Just like generally shorter horizon, lower multiple, because they're more mature companies, less risk, right?
Right.
Venture capital, on the other hand, invests usually in companies much earlier, where their business plan is much more hypothetical. Their product might not even be fully developed. And so a venture capital fund versus a private equity fund has a longer horizon. 10 years is a very common horizon, if not longer. Companies are actually taking longer and longer to grow into venture returns. Our fund is a 10-year fund. Okay. So that means in 2033, I need to liquidate our holdings. Now, with the earlier ownership, I have a higher potential for big returns if I'm good at my job. So you would have a longer horizon, but a venture capital fund manager would be aiming for a higher multiple of returns. So averages are hard in venture capital because average isn't helpful. It's really a very widely dispersed performance. But you might say within 10 years, we have a model that can 5x the fund versus 2.5x.
Yeah. So it's very dynamic. Mm-hmm. It's always moving. You're probably always fundraising.
Yes.
And always looking for things to invest in, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have a big job.
Yes. We're middlemen.
Yes.
In some ways.
Yeah. But your team is super impressive. You and Tim and Rye together as a group, you have an incredible track record. Over $3 billion of value created already within your team. One of the most exciting things that's happened within your team is the development of differential. And then you can explain exactly how this transpired then into Astronomer, which our listeners have probably heard a little bit about in the news lately, but an amazing company that started right here in Cincinnati.
Kind of the thing that we think differentiates Fireroad from a lot of other investors in the region is our operating experience. So I've kind of shared a little bit about my operating experience, mostly in a nonprofit context. My partners, Tim and Rye, have been building tech startups since 2014 or before. And one of the projects they started together is a development shop called Differential. And what Differential did at the time was create software for other companies, but then also create some of their own software. And one of the products they developed turned into a company that's called Astronomer. And when that product, we say spun out, when they spun out Astronomer, Rye, one of our venture partners, led that company as the CEO for a very long time until 2021, I believe. My partner, Tim, started Ocean Accelerator alongside some other friends who helped launch that nonprofit, and then worked with another set of serial entrepreneurs to start Coterie, which is an insurance technology company that has spent a lot of time in the city. I think their staff is very remote now and distributed, but Tim co-founded Coterie. And then my partner, Brad, who mostly manages our holdings business, had his own founder experience developing an app called Commas, which is a wealth planning tool for the mass affluent. And then he was able to sell that to a local wealth manager.
Our family takes advantage of that. All three of our children are still using the Commas platform. And it's a wonderful way to get young people started almost immediately when they get out of college and start a career into their future investment life. And they really help soup to nuts too. It isn't just wealth management. They helped my daughter get all set up to buy a house. And they're terrific. Thank you, Brad, for helping the Aichholz family.
Yeah. So I think that operating experience is important when we're working with founders. Not only do we know how to read a spreadsheet in the way any investor should know how to read a spreadsheet, but we also know how to recruit teams, how to fix problems in a product. We know how to fundraise ourselves. Right. We know how to market. We know how to work with co-founders when it's very multi-dimensional, multi-layered relationship that's intense. That's where we really try to amplify our voice in our partnership with founders, is to bring that operating experience to their network alongside many of our peers whose real strength is in the financial mechanisms of investing.
Let's talk about the fundraising, because When you hear the word fundraising, you think nonprofit development, raising funds, doing an event, things like that. This is a whole different ballgame.
Well, I would posit it's not.
It's still asking for money.
Yep.
And in the nonprofit world, they're not going to get a whole lot of return. And the for-profit, they have to realize they may not get a return.
Certainly the venture. On the venture side,
right.
It's high risk.
Yeah, it is high risk. What does a sales cycle look like for you when you are cultivating new investors?
Yeah. When we set out to raise our first fund, it's called an offering, and you set a period of time for which the offering is available. And kind of the standard starting place is 18 months, maybe 24 months. After which point you close the offering, you close the fund. We had an 18-month offering on our Fund 1 and raised $5 million.
Nice.
And closed that in October of 2024. Our launch date was April 4, 2023. Our final close was October 4, 2024.
Nice.
18 months to the day. And it's countersigning paperwork, I kid you not, at 11:15 p.m. on October 4.
Oh my
gosh. We took every minute of that 18-month window. And what that means is that right now, I'm not officially fundraising, but the business model of venture capital is such that we will have a second fund.
Right.
And in addition to working to earn and keep the trust of our Fund 1 investors, believing that they will want to keep going with us for Fund 2, we also are always trying to extend our network and trying to cultivate new investors.
Right. It isn't like the fund will open on a certain date and then you hit the ground running on fundraising. You have already been laying the groundwork and
always
creating the relationship. How many of your investors are individuals versus other funds?
87 of my 89 investors are individuals.
Really?
Yes.
That is exciting. I like that. It's hard. It'd be a lot easier if there were 3 or 4 funds, but
I wouldn't mind that for Fund 2. But it's a very normal story for an emerging fund manager. In your first fund, you're really tapping your personal network and building a track record. And then as you continue to progress, you kind of earn the right to speak with some of the institutional investors that tend to write larger checks.
Once you have the fund and you start making the investments, how much interaction does the investor have with the companies you're investing in?
That really varies across different managers. We try to be really active conduits between our portfolio companies and our LPs. Limited partners is kind of the legal term for our investors. And right now we have a database where I can see, like, especially for our investors who have very proactively made themselves available. We have some investors who have said, please don't connect me to people. I have enough going on. But by and large, our LPs are very willing to interact with our portfolio companies.
Oh, that's great.
And we try to do our best to have accurate information on what industries our LPs work in, what their experience is, what kinds of problems they're the most helpful to help solve, what kinds of businesses they're operating, because actually a fair amount of our LPs are small business owner operators, which is great. When I'm looking at technology for a small business, we can ask them, what do you think? How do you experience this problem? Would a solution like this be helpful for you? And they give us a lot of inside knowledge, both before an investment and then after an investment, supporting the founders.
In your portfolio companies so far, have they all been able to maintain and grow? Are there any that fall off?
Yes.
98% of startups don't make it. So
we have had, to date, we've made 23 investments, and we will be targeting another 10 to 12 investments out of our first fund. Of the 23 investments we've made so far, 2 have already sunset. A third is working on a wind down. And then from there, it's all over the place. We have some who have tripled their revenue since we invested, and some that are working really, really hard to figure out what they need to do to get to a viable product and market. So it's all over the board. Because we invest so very early in the life cycle of a company, it's hard to tell because oftentimes there's some false signal, some false positive, or
lots of optimism on the part of the founder.
Or quick sales.
I love that you invest so early because I think one of the things, having so much experience in the startup industry, is just it's so hard to get off the block when you're a new young company and it is all speculative at that point. You might have the greatest idea, but you don't know what the roadblocks are going to be. You don't know what obstacles you're going to run into. And if you don't get that really early funding, you're just floundering. And I think that's why there's such a high percentage of companies that don't make it, because they're just not getting the support that early on. And I also think that when you invest that early, you can do more hand-holding. You can do more digging into the almost day-to-day of the company to some extent to give them the support that they need. And I think that that's really unique about Fireroad. I love your mission to cultivate entrepreneurship as a force for good in the world. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that is your why of why you're doing what you're doing. How is Fireroad achieving that mission differently than maybe other funds?
When Fireroad launched, we coalesced around this premise of a good job is a really good thing for people. And we have a couple bullet points around what we think an actual good job is. It's not just high pay. It has some other characteristics. And the fundamental work of entrepreneurship, I think you could look at it two ways. You could look at it, it's innovation, it's creating something new, a new product, a new technology, a new medical intervention, some entrepreneurship in that kind of frontier discover invention side. And we kind of look at it from a company and value creation side, more commercially, around creating a company where people can realize life-giving work, where they are led by people of character, and where they also can express the skills and the passions and the interests that are innate to who they are. Both of those types of outcomes of entrepreneurship are very important. I think our lives would be so different if it weren't for the scientific innovation that a lot of venture capital supported. Similarly, our lives and our communities would be so different if a business never got off the ground and if there weren't these employment opportunities in our neighborhood, in our city.
Small business is the heartbeat of the country, and it's what builds our communities. What is it, 70-some% of businesses are actually considered small businesses?
And they employ 50% of the U.S. workforce and spend 50% of what is spent on technology every single year. A small business is 50% of the software and IT services spend in the United States every year. Yeah. But all the technology is developed for enterprise customers.
Exactly. But it makes so much sense because as a small business, we have fewer employees. We have to rely on technology so much more.
True.
Really, to do what we do. That's exciting.
That's a great point.
I like it.
So that's kind of how we are coming at entrepreneurship, and the part of entrepreneurship that lights us up is the ripple effect. And that's something that we all experienced as leaders, is the joy of building teams.
Yeah.
And being there with people when there's something going on in their household that is needs care, and to be able to be in a role to offer that care, to offer that support, and to say your job is safe. Also, on the flip side, having been in the seat to say this isn't working, and to be able to do that as an employer in a way that is dignified, that is open and transparent and proactive, is just as powerful of a moment, I think. So that's when we think of entrepreneurship for good. That's the kind of effect we're trying to have, not just both on a personal and in a community level.
Right. I love how you've defined your mission. I think it's very clear, it's different, and it serves everybody in the mix. It serves the investor, serves the community, it serves the founder, it serves you all. If someone has a small business that fits into your thesis, how do they find you? How do they know about you?
Our website has a number of different contact forms.
Okay. Fireroad.io.
Yeah. So we're looking for two really very different things. On the small business holding side, what that team is looking for is an established service business that is maybe about $2 million in EBITDA.
Okay.
So probably $10-ish million in revenue.
Okay.
So that's a fairly large business in a service sector.
Yeah.
We want to be involved in service delivery, partially because of how influential those companies are in their workforce lives.
Right.
And then also because those are the jobs that we are very confident AI is not going to disrupt.
Right. Oh, good
in
point.
the next 15 years.
Good point.
I think it'll be a while before we have robots coming to our home to flush the air conditioner, you know?
I wish a robot could come to my home and clean it.
Well, my husband sent me a video of a laundry folding robot today.
Oh,
it's like,
sounds good.
We have 5 baskets of laundry on our couch right now.
Is that what kids are for?
They don't do it quite right yet. So that's what we're looking for in the holdings business. On the ventures side, what I'm looking for is real infinitely scalable technology that is solving a business critical problem for operators in a service sector or a small business, like a new nutritional bar company or something like that would not be a good fit for us because that has an element of production. It's usually selling directly to consumers.
Right.
Or to distributors instead of to another business.
Okay, so you're more B2B.
Yeah, for B2B technology, yeah.
Well, I think our time is starting to wrap up. Is there anything that we didn't cover? Anything that you want our listeners to know about Fireroad, about you, about what's next for Fireroad?
What's next for Fireroad, I think, is very exciting. I think we are so early. 2 years in does feel like a lifetime. At the same time, we are chasing generational impact. We want to be an enduring firm. We view this as our life's work and plan to be here for a really long time.
Nice.
We want to have the kind of impact and the kind of effects that we've been talking about for our communities, even our small, not just the Cincinnati metro, but, I live up north in Lebanon is like, what does it look like for Fireroad to matter in a town like Lebanon? What effect might we have? And we think about that day in and day out and hope at the end of the day in 40 years.
Well, you're young. You'll still be involved.
that those around us and our community will kind of testify to that impact. Yeah.
So are you mostly the Cincinnati region in your investments, or are you investing in companies all over the place?
On the venture side, I invest coast to coast.
Oh, nice.
So we have a density in the Midwest, and we have a bias for founders who are building from the Midwest, but we don't have a restriction. Yeah. Yeah, we have a bias, not a mandate, is how we talk about it.
Yeah. And what about the holdings?
Holdings is looking for a drivable distance, kind of within, 90, 100 miles
so you can
of
support
Cincinnati.
It, be involved.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, great. Well, if you are a company that could be a holding company or would be looking for venture capital, you can find Christy and her team at fireroad.io. If you have an interest in being an early stage investor, I've heard Christy say that they're in a fund, there could be many individuals, which does keep your individual investment reasonable. If you are dipping into the venture world for the first time, this would be a great fund to kind of come and play with and get to know. And it's friendly and welcoming.
We are fun.
Yeah. We are. Yes, you are fun. Definitely fun. Yeah. So, Christy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Nancy.
And I'm excited to see what happens. And I'll be ready to see what happens when Fund 2 launches.
All right.
Exciting.
Yeah.
So, thank you.